All right, ready to dive into a topic that's, well, it feels like it's everywhere these days. Narcissism.
Oh, definitely. Always hearing about it.
Yeah, but are we really getting the full picture? What's it actually like to see the world through the eyes of someone dealing with those traits?
Right beyond the label.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're going straight to the source. Reddit. Specifically, reverse narcissism.
Interesting. Why that particular corner of the internet?
Well, this isn't your average subreddit. They've got a rule: only people who identify with cluster B personality disorders, which includes narcissistic personality disorder, can post.
Wow, so it's like a direct line to those experiences.
Exactly. Unfiltered right from the source.
So what are we seeing? What are people sharing in this space?
It's a real mix, honestly. Personal stories, relationship stuff, people trying to figure themselves out, even ethical dilemmas. Wild stuff. But one thing that really struck me is just how different everyone's experience with narcissism seems to be. It's definitely not one size fits all.
A spectrum, right?
Totally. Like there's this one user, you by know 2006. They talk about this past relationship, realizing it was toxic, love bombing at the start, then pulling away emotionally, freaking out over any little criticism.
Yeah, that classic push and pull. It's all tied to that idea of narcissistic supply, like they need that constant validation, admiration from others to prop up their own self-esteem. And when it drops
The
off,
wheels come off.
exactly, that's when you get those withdrawal behaviors, the anger, all that.
So it's not just them being difficult on purpose. There's this whole other layer, this psychological need driving things.
Right. And understanding that is huge. Now, it's important to note, You Been 2006 does admit to being emotionally abusive at times, which we can't downplay. But there's also this recognition of their own role in the relationship ending, even defending their ex at times. So there's self-awareness there, too.
Like they're starting to peek behind the curtain of their own behavior.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got someone like UJEH88, whose story shows just how different those outward signs of narcissism can be. They were this child prodigy, tons of praise and attention. Right.
Setting them up for what, a big ego trip?
You'd think, but they actually connect it to this deep sense of shame. Like, yeah, they feel superior sometimes, but it's paired with this almost crippling feeling of inadequacy.
So instead of being outwardly grandiose, it's more internalized.
Exactly. Covert or vulnerable narcissism is what it's often called. Less about needing the spotlight and more about this deep feeling of being flawed, even while they might project this image of superiority.
Two very different experiences, but both rooted in that struggle with sense of self.
Absolutely. And it really makes you think about how much early experiences, especially those that shape how we see ourselves, how worthy we feel, it can have such a lasting impact.
Makes you wonder, how much is a conscious choice versus being rooted in those early experiences,
Million-dollar question. And it gets even more complex when we look at how this all plays out in relationships, especially when it comes to empathy or that perceived lack of it.
It's like we always hear narcissists lack empathy. But these stories from narcissism, it's way more complicated than that.
Oh, yeah. Not so simple. Take Odancergaard, for example. It talks about being emotionally abusive toward their partner, but also, really loving this person deeply. Like, they'll go for the silent treatment knowing it hurts, then feel guilty later.
So there is that caring there somewhere, just trouble expressing it.
Right. It's connected to this idea that empathy's got layers. You've got cognitive empathy, understanding someone's perspective, and then affective empathy, actually feeling what they feel. So someone with these traits, maybe they get it intellectually, but that emotional piece making you actually stop and change your behavior because you feel that hurt.
That connection is just not fully there.
Yeah. Makes it less about being intentionally cruel, more about this disconnect inside them.
Wow. That actually explains a lot, honestly.
And then there's UDirect Linky 9 Thursday. This one, it's a doozy. They suggest people like this with narcissistic tendencies should go into law enforcement or be lawyers.
Yeah, that one sparked some debate, let's say, among our team, too.
Definitely thought-provoking. Their whole logic is these professions, they let you use that understanding of rules, systems to advocate for justice, channeling those traits into, a force for good, right?
So it's not about erasing those tendencies completely, but sort of harnessing them.
Exactly. But then we're in this ethical gray area.
Yeah.
Are we really redirecting something potentially harmful or just finding ways to justify bad behavior?
It is a tightrope walk, for sure.
Yeah.
And speaking of tightropes, this whole idea of change, can people with these traits actually change?
The million-dollar question, right? And on the subreddit, you get everything from total resignation to, surprising hopefulness.
Yeah, some folks sounded almost stuck. Like it's just who they are, end of story. But then there's US0M 3083 Sad, who had this huge realization after a friend cut ties, realized their own covert narcissism was affecting people, and decided, I want to be better.
The power of self-awareness right there. Recognizing the impact of their actions was everything.
And then there's your fuzzy slice 5565.
Yeah.
They talk about shifting from grandiose narcissism to, get this, cerebral narcissism.
Okay, now we're getting into the nuances. Because grandiose, that's the one everyone pictures, right? Center of attention, needs constant validation, even if it means putting others down.
Hollywood narcissist.
Exactly. But cerebral, that's a new one.
Fill us in.
So, they describe it as the shift towards utilitarianism, focusing on actions that, in their mind, create the most good for the most people. They figure, hey, they can still achieve, still get that satisfaction, but in a way that's ethical, maybe even helps others.
So less about me, more about the bigger impact, even if it's still driven by their own needs.
Exactly, like trying to hack their own psychology, using that ambition for something positive. But it does make you think, is it truly altruistic? Or just a more, I don't know, sophisticated way of getting those needs met?
Right, like how do we know though if intentions are pure or if it's self-serving in disguise? It gets murky fast.
Yeah, and
It's
it's like we're trying to unpack these deep hidden motives from, what, a couple paragraphs someone wrote on the internet feels impossible.
Exactly. We're trying to understand these really complex people, but just through these tiny glimpses, these online personas, makes you realize, we can't jump to conclusions.
For sure. And it's easy to label, right? Especially with a word like narcissist. But reading these stories, what really got me was, honestly, how much vulnerability there is. Like, these are real people struggling with their own stuff, often carrying so much shame.
It's dehumanizing, to reduce someone to a label. Behind every diagnosis, every label, there's a whole person there.
Yeah.
And the thing is, they want to change. Like we saw with U3030M3 and 303 Ufuzzy Slice 5565. Makes you think, if these individuals are trying, taking steps, how can we, like as a society, support that instead of making it harder?
Right, because the judgment and stigma, that doesn't help anyone. How do we create spaces where people can actually grow, become more self-aware? Isn't that what we all want deep down?
To be better? I think so, yeah.
And I think exploring this stuff, even though it can get kind of heavy, there's hope here, Change is possible, self-awareness is huge, and even in the depths of Reddit, you see this vulnerability, this desire to connect.
Totally. It's like a reminder, nothing's black and white. People are messy, lots of gray areas. And in those gray areas, that's where the potential for growth is, for healing.
Beautifully said. And sometimes it starts with just, listening, trying to understand, offering a little grace.
A little compassion goes a long way. So to our listeners, as you're navigating your own lives, your own relationships, hold on to that empathy, okay? For yourself and for the people around you. Because we never know what someone else is battling beneath the surface. And maybe, just maybe, that understanding is how we start to build a world where change and growth, they're met not with judgment, but with open arms.
I love that thought. Really beautifully said. It's a powerful message to end on, for sure.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. As always, keep those conversations going, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.